Welcome to this brief video in which we seek to unpack just a few amongst a dizzying array of approaches designed to engage students in reading for meaning. Helping students read more and better has always been a key goal for English educators. However, many have learnt the hard way that simply giving students complex texts doesn't mean that they will read and understand them. Likewise, the mistake has often been made of scaffolding complex texts so heavily as to remove the need for students to read them altogether. More recent research suggests that rather than relying on instructional routines that implement either too little or too much teaching, there is a need for teachers to scaffold instruction, yet also be aware of when to transfer the cognitive and metacognitive responsibility to students. Accordingly, this video focuses on the major strategies of close and scaffolded reading instruction to achieve this purpose. Close or analytic reading is hardly a new approach to aiding students to access complex texts. It has actually existed for some time as the practice of reading a text for a deeper level of detail than is usually sought after in an everyday reading. This requires students to examine the underlying structures of a text and develop a fairly sophisticated understanding of what the author has actually said. As expressed by Alder and Van Duren, this means to X-ray the book for the skeleton hidden between the covers. To facilitate this, Fisher and Frey highly recommend that teachers utilise the following close reading practices. Select short, worthy passages, prompt students rereading, limit front-loading, ask text-dependent questions, model and guide annotation, and construct meaningful after-reading tasks. Now let's examine each of these in more detail. Short, worthy passages. Close readings can be time-consuming, so it is best to select shorter pieces of text or short passages from longer texts that are challenging and allow students to exercise the analytical skills demonstrated by accomplished readers. Students rereading. Students must be able to read and reread the selected text several times with a specific purpose for each attempt. In addition to improving fluency, comprehension, and retention, the practice of rereading is essential to ensuring that our purposes for reading aren't so narrow as to be viewed solely as a school activity, one to be avoided at all costs outside the classroom. Limit front-loading. Close reading emphasises discovery, that is, for students to identify what is confusing and ways and resources that they can use to resolve this confusion. Usually, this requires that rereading, class discussions, and text-dependent questions take the place of extensive front-loading activities, in which the teacher does most of the heavy lifting for the students. Text-dependent questions. Students are often encouraged to answer questions that remove them from the reading prematurely and ask them to consider their own experiences rather than what the text is actually saying. Rosenblatt argues that this can lead to students mistakenly imputing to the author views unjustified by the text. Contrastingly, students should be asked to respond to text-dependent questions, requiring them to provide evidence from the text. For example, consider the following questions that a teacher could ask students about Lois Lowry's dystopian young adult novel, The Giver. While students may be actively engaged in a class discussion related to the former questions, they can be answered without ever having read the book and do not require students to develop any understanding of the narrative and ideas presented by the author. Text-dependent questions should also move through a progression that encompasses general understanding, key details, vocabulary and text structure, author's purpose, inferences, and opinions, arguments, and intertextual connections. Annotation. Making notes and taking the time to read with a pencil is indispensable to interacting with the text, as it allows students to revise their understandings and locate evidence quickly when they need it. After reading tasks. As opposed to taking students away from the text immediately, after reading tasks that require them to return to and use information from the text should be constructed to help students consolidate meaning and deepen their comprehension. In addition to close reading, scaffolded reading instruction using small groups can be helpful in facilitating students' access to complex texts. It is important to note here that in scaffolded reading, the student, not the teacher, is the reader. Small groups help differentiate support. Students have similar strengths and needs for practicality and peer assistance. Grouping patterns change frequently so that students benefit from numerous opportunities to learn with one another, and learners are guided using questions to check for understanding, prompts, cues, and direct explanations where necessary. This video has briefly outlined a few key approaches to engaging and enhancing students' reading comprehension abilities through close and scaffolded reading instruction. Additional references and further information to assist teachers in implementing these strategies can be found in the accompanying study guide.